On this episode of Mighty Car Mods, I'm going to put a shiny new turbo on the MR2. Welcome to another episode of Mighty Car Mods. It's raining, that's why it sounds like there's rain on the roof of the shed. In more exciting news, I have a turbo. So this is actually a factory turbo that ATS Racing in America rebuild for you. High flow, they put a billet wheel in it, and an Iconel rear wheel instead of a ceramic one that comes from the factory. And the awesome thing is it bolts in just like a normal turbo, except it's higher flow, more performance, more spoolie, all those good things. So the old turbo is going to come off. Today I'm going to attempt to install this. I say attempt because nothing works easily on this car. And once this is in, a whole bunch of the other mods can take place, but this is what makes it all possible. So let's do it.
A rebuilt factory turbo is an excellent option if you want to bump in performance but don't want to have to custom fabricate every single supporting part. There are still physical limitations of how big the housings, turbine and compressor can be, but with today's modern CNC technology, it's possible to get a significant performance boost in the same size housings. With the manifold removed off the engine, I'm able to swap the turbos on the bench, which is way easier, especially when you're dealing with stubborn nuts and bolts. It's a good idea to soak any fasteners overnight or longer for maximum penetrative effect. My MR2 originally came with a CT26, which is a turbo Toyota put on lots of different cars, including Supras, Soras and Cressidas amongst others. My new turbo is an ATS CT21 Blackjack, which is based on a CT20 as used in later model MR2s. It turns out the gaskets weren't great, and this is now the perfect opportunity to replace them and install new studs into the manifold.
Pop. This is why it's a great idea to get a new gasket kit if you're swapping a turbo. The gasket that came off, the one that goes between the manifold and the exhaust housing, smashed. The one that's on the water pipes, smashed. Luckily got a new one. Even if they're like second-hand but good, just replace it with something, because if you put that back on and it's not right, guaranteed it will leak and cause you mad headaches. You've also got to clean up this surface once you pull it off, because you've got any old gasket material there, that can be a spot that it leaks out from. Oh yes. A lot of people that have like one or two project cars, or maybe they stick to a particular brand for most of their life when they're modifying cars, so you get to know it really, really well and learn lots of good tips. One tip I've learned from MR2 owners, who happen to be very friendly I might add, is that you can actually take your boot lid off and sit or stand in your boot to work on your engine. How many other cars could you say you could do that on? Could you imagine doing that on a normal sedan with the boot at the back and the engine in the front? You'd have to be really long and very flexible. Not in this case. Give me a normal MR2 owner. All the mad tips coming from the internets. Thanks, people. Oh, man, that's a heavy boot. Oh my God, they're right. This is excellent. This is like the best tip ever. Thank you, internet. I would never have thought of removing my boot so I could change studs in the engine, but this is heaps better. If nothing else, just because you can see what you're doing. Great, mad tip. We all learnt something. I'm really, really keen to get this new turbo on, but while I'm here and I've got really good access, I'm going to swap out this clutch slave cylinder. Now the new one's an upgraded one from a Camry. Not something you hear very often, upgraded from a Camry. But in this case, it's an upgrade, so we're going to put it on.
At around 75 bucks, this is a cheap mod made by DK Imports in the USA that gets me a new slave cylinder and a brand new braided line for a reliable clutch with good feel.
The engine is now ready to accept our mad new turbo on the existing manifold. The gasket's in, it's looking good. This is the aftermarket dump pipe I got because the factory one was basically completely boned. So I have to remove one stud because this turbo will fit multiple generations of MR2s. So this stud isn't required. What we do have to test though is that this wastegate flap doesn't hit on the actual dump pipe itself once it's on there. If that does, that can cause like crazy boost control issues. Luckily that's easy to do, bit of compressed air in the top of the wastegate, bolt this on and just listen for any tapping sounds.
The dump pipe passed the test, now it's time to get it into the car.
That's so cool. Oil lines are reconnected on the turbo. The dump is on. It's all looking really good. This clutch line, this is a new clutch line that we put in. That's dangling here. And the awesome thing is it replaces all this complicated mess and just connects into the factory spot. You plug the pedal into it, bleed it up, and away you go. So I'll do that next, and we'll just keep moving on, keep going. The mail keeps flowing in with mods and replacement parts, in this case, handbrake cables. For really stubborn bolts when penetrant soaking isn't enough, applying some heat can help unseat things. I'm also using a pipe spanner on the clutch line, but it still won't budge, so that can be a problem for Ron. Good stuff now. I've gotten rid of the throttle body. That'll have to go on, obviously, again, but I've got some extra parts coming for that. That'll be a little bit neater. Now I'm trying to just simplify some of this weird old 90s or 80s design stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure this manifold has a 5th injector. There's a high pressure fuel feed that runs off the rail that the injectors sit on, and it goes up into this intake manifold, which is super weird. I know they revised it. This is the earliest one they made. There might have been a Celica one before this, but this is the earliest MR2 one they made. And in the later ones, it all looks a bit more modern and clean and better. So I think I'm dealing with some of the oldest junk. There's also a couple little oil leaks happening around here that I suspect are all coming from the rocker cover, so I've got a new gasket for that. So I'm trying to pull as much stuff as I can away and out of the way so that, oh, it didn't hit the ground, so that I can get that off and not risk stuff falling into it. I've also got to change the injectors. I've got a new fuel rail. I'm going to get rid of some of this evaporation and emission stuff that will still be there but will function way easier, cleaner, run some hoses for that. And then our fuel system will be up to the task. So next is fuel system, ignition system, turbos on, and once all that stuff's together, it's then managing it with a computer, putting some pipes back in. It's heaps of work actually. It's actually a lot of work. But this is the fun bit, don't forget. My electric ratchet. Just trying to get the rocker cover off. And there's a wiring loom that goes in this plastic thing and goes down. I'm like, oh, that's a funny little mysterious wire that disappears into the exhaust manifold. Now, why would it be in the exhaust manifold? Because when I put the turbo on, I sandwiched it and then bolted it down. So now I've got to unbolt all that turbo stuff to get the wire out. Oh, there it is. Did we put something through it? Is it wrecked? Whew. Oh God. Oh wow. A few oil changes may have been missed. The old injectors are out. They're big old side feeds. Due to the angle of this intake manifold and the fact that the engine leans back, it's actually quite hard to see what's going on down here. So what I'm doing is simplifying, removing anything we don't need. The old boost control, don't need. So there's a whole lot of metal pipes that are attached to the manifold that can just come off because we don't need them anymore and they just get in the way. A lot of cleaning up to do here as well, just to make sure nothing falls into the ports that the injectors are connected to. A bit of old wiring that can go in the bin as well. But overall, making progress.
Many cars of this era came with big side feed injectors. Top feed injectors are modern, cheap, and luckily you can buy aftermarket fuel rails like this one from Racer X. I got a set of 1000cc injectors that, using some clever adapters, will fit straight onto my old engine. There are cheaper ways to mix and match rails off different cars and newer engines, but whichever way you do it, it's a low hassle upgrade that will help supply the fuel to support more power.
Fuel rail fits really nicely. Injectors have a little bit of movement in there, which is what you want, so they're snug, but they can still move around, which means that the O-rings aren't caught up on anything. I've actually run out of parts again. Good problem to have. Some of this stuff should be here tomorrow, things like fuel line fittings, wiring, some stuff that's missing for the dump, various little pieces that will help complete this, so we'll wait for them to arrive and get back into it. It's a new day and about half the stuff I've ordered has arrived, including this. I'm waiting on mostly hoses and electrical stuff that will make all this work. So I'm actually we're now done in the engine bay, so let's continue working on some other stuff. Now it turns out this has an aftermarket shifter put into it, some kind of kit it looks like with some Bunnings bolts. I don't like it. It makes the car harder to drive. It makes the gears a bit crunchy because there just isn't the correct engagement on the cables. What I've done is I've got myself from MR2 Wreckers, it's a slightly later generation shifter plate, so the factory improved upon what the original one had, and these are sort of known to be the sweet spot between a sporty shift but still long enough that you've got the leverage to actually pull the gear correctly, because a short shift is all well and good if it still engages gears correctly, but if it doesn't, I feel like it's a bit of a waste of time because you're going slower, you're missing gears, you're crunching gears, and you're wrecking your gearbox. So this will bolt straight in, reattach the cables, and that's the shifter all sorted. So this car might have had a nice little vacuum leak because there's some kind of boost gauge or vacuum pipe that just goes nowhere. All the stuff has arrived to make up the fuel system. I got hose, I got fittings, I got a banjo adapters to get onto the fuel pump. I got some brass washers and P-clips and other stuff just to tidy it up. So I might move on to that, being that this is sort of the next most important thing to make this car actually run.
Being that I still have a number of parts that need to be installed, like the intercooler, intake coils and wiring loom, I have to map out where the fuel lines can go. That won't cause me headaches later on. By removing some of the now not required factory hard lines, I can free up some space and declutter. I'm blocking off the port for the 5th injector under the throttle body using some aluminium plate as it's no longer required for cold starting. Next, while I've got good access, I'm going to install some new NGK spark plugs. A good rule of thumb is to go 1 heat range colder for every 75 to 100 horsepower that you add. Modified or turbocharged engines will typically require a smaller electrode gap. It's a good idea to check your plugs individually using feeler gauges, but using NGK's part numbering system chart, you can order the appropriate plug for your application straight off the shelf. With my sparks sorted, the rocker cover can then be cleaned so it has time to dry before it's reinstalled with a new gasket.
I'm going to move on to the fuel system. I'm waiting for some other stuff to happen in the meantime. This is the way I like to do it. I've got a GFP fuel pressure regulator, which also comes with a gauge that allows you to dial in exactly what fuel pressure you want. It's boost reference, so if the boost goes up, so does the fuel pressure, which makes tuning nice and easy. This is the way I like to do it. There's lots of different ways to customize and make your fuel system. You can use totally factory stuff, which is usually just like barb fittings pushed straight on. You can also use like AN fittings. These are Raceworks AN fittings, in this case -6, which is the equivalent size to what the factory fuel system is, but gives you a little bit more versatility because you can do like right angles and the fittings will go straight onto aftermarket fuel rails and filters and these things if you want. I'm using a bit of a combination of both. I've got some fuel-proof -6 hose, which looks like that, which all these fittings will work. And now this is push lock, so for the amount of pressure we're using, you don't even really need to put a clamp, but I like to put clamps on it anyway, just for peace of mind. I find this really easy to work with, also really easy to take apart if you get it wrong. Making fittings out of like Teflon braided tube is the best way to go, no doubt, especially for really high power, high pressure applications. But it's harder to customize if you get it slightly wrong, or if you're new at it, or if in this application we're not making huge power, so we don't need to. This is also a little bit cheaper. So the next step is to put this fuel pressure reg together, start to plumb things in and start to work out where the fuel lines are going to go. It's a bit tricky at this stage because I don't really know where everything's going to be. Don't know where the intercooler is going to be. Don't have my plugs for my injectors yet. They should be here tomorrow, which means I can't put the loom in. There's bits of factory hoses that I'm missing that don't work that I need to put in as well. So there's still a few question marks, but I'm trying to sort of rough everything so that once it's all here, put it all together, turn it on.
Rocker covers are responsible for a lot of common oil leaks. The seals are subjected to heat extremes, they age, dry out, and then oil slowly seeps down the side of the engine, over just about everything else on its way. They're cheap and easy to fit, and a little bit of grey sealant on the corners is often a good idea. I've got myself some injector plug adapters that will allow me to plug in my aftermarket injectors into the factory loom, which can go back in place, minus some of the old cracked plastic covers. The throttle body can be reinstalled after a good clean out with solvent and a brush. I've also got this intake adapter, which is a standard 2.5-inch tube size, perfect for attaching intercooler pipes, and as a bonus has a slightly larger internal diameter.
Engine cooling done, turbo's done, the throttle body's done, injectors are done, fuel system's done. Getting close, people. The next lot of mods to do is engine management, and intercooling, tidy up the interior and a few other bits and pieces, and then tune it. Next time on Mighty Car Mods.